My honest impressions of Baldur's Gate 3. What I love and don't love. Baldur's Gate 3 is a story rich, party based RPG set in the universe of Dungeons and Dragons, where your choices shape a tale of fellowship and betrayal, survival and sacrifice, and the lure of absolute power. No doubt you've heard of Baldur's Gate 3 by now, as it's seemingly become a phenomenon overnight. There's no shortage of creators and players alike singing the game's praises with glowing reviews. There is, however, a minority of players who did not enjoy their initial experience with the game, and I have to admit that I was among them. Now, I've been hesitant to make this review because I want to make sure that I frame my criticism in a way that doesn't have the whole of Baldur's Gate community outside my door with torches and pitchforks. There is a lot I love about this game, but there are also a number of things that I've had to look past in order to fully enjoy and appreciate it. Let's begin with what I love. And I should note, this list is not exhaustive and continues to grow. First, the game is breathtaking. I don't think anyone can deny the game's sheer beauty. Baldur's Gate 3 is easily one of the best looking fantasy games ever. Period. Second, Larian's adaptation of the Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition rule set is masterful. It's uncanny how well the complex mechanics of D&D have been implemented. Larian has been able to bring the classic tabletop adventure game to life while for the most part remaining true to D&D's spirit. Third, the sheer scope and level of detail is mind-numbing. The care and effort that must have been put into crafting the game's environments is difficult to fathom. The result is a world that's hard to not get lost in. Fourth, player agency and divergent story threads. This is the beating heart of Dungeons and Dragons and role playing games in general, and Baldur's Gate 3 far from disappoints in this respect. The wealth of dialogue choices and variety of encounters makes every playthrough fresh and engaging while empowering the player to really get into character. And finally, the most important aspect for myself is the character customization in terms of gameplay mechanics. The depth of classes, subclasses, and how different party compositions combine to create synergy, balance, or overpowered force all makes for an incredibly engaging experience. One can easily spend hours carefully choosing a character's race, class, and abilities, and an endless amount of time experimenting with different party compositions. This is what will keep me coming back to the game for days, weeks, months, and very likely years to come. Impressive stuff. So, what's not to love? Well, there are a few things. To be fair, these are mostly personal preferences, but I feel I'm not alone in feeling their impact, and it would not be genuine if I did not point them out. One of the first things I notice about this game is its underlying worldview. This is something that will impact every single player differently, as we all have our own unique history, background, and personal makeup. For myself, it did make me pause for a moment, but it's not something that is ultimately going to deter me from playing the game. However, there are some who have raised concerns of what may be a political agenda, ideology, or even subtle propaganda. Whether overt, implicit, unintentional, or accidental, I couldn't say. I especially won't reserve judgment on a game's underlying philosophy when I've barely scratched the surface. However, I believe it's important to think critically about these types of things while keeping an open mind. And let's not forget the old saying that art imitates life, and we all experience art differently, regardless of the artist's intent. Even the grandfather of fantasy, J.R. Tolkien, famously admitted to an underlying Christian worldview in his pioneering works, The Lord of the Rings. The last thing I want to say on this topic before moving on is that Dungeons and Dragons has always been a world based on openness and inclusion, and nowhere better reflects this fact than Baldur's Gate. That's all I want to say about that. Moving on. The next thing I want to talk about is learning the game. Now, this is somewhat of a double edged sword because the game doesn't hold your hand. Rather, it encourages you to experiment and figure things out on your own. However, on the other side of that are tutorials that are somewhat vague and an interaction with the world or managing inventory tables or understanding combat options that can be extremely frustrating at times. For players new to the game and new to Larian games as well, or even new to Dungeons and Dragons, and this is somewhat of a steep learning curve, which creates a barrier to entry. Better fleshed out tutorials would go a long way in remedying this minor gripe. The next series of criticisms will have a common thread in that they could be considered immersion breaking. First off, character creation. Now, I fully realize this is simply a cosmetic concern. I've already mentioned how great character customization is, but the personalization of your character's appearance is somewhat lacking. Only two body types for each gender and barely half a dozen options for each race's gender doesn't allow for that truly personal touch. I think players would have appreciated a bit more variety here in order to bring their imagined Dungeons and Dragons characters to life. Character creation in terms of personalized appearance falls a little flatter than it should and doesn't necessarily immerse the player fully. Now, the next point I want to make is for me by far the most immersion breaking voice selection. What was the point of choosing a unique voice for my character if he or she barely ever speaks? What's the point of intricate dialogue options if my character just stares blankly mute all of the time? I don't feel like I'm in the story, I feel like I'm spectating. This runs completely counter to what the game attempts to achieve. I get it though, it's a lot of effort to add extra voiceover and animations. This to me though is a bad excuse. Either dumb down the scope, spend more time developing the game, or drop one of the other characters because the one you're playing as, the one you created, is the main character. He or she should be in the damn story. I don't want to belabor this point, but it did take me some time to get past it. Don't brag about the scope of your story rich experience if you're only offering essentially half the story. Next, artificial difficulty. One of the advantages of creating fixed encounters rather than random ones is that it doesn't require much complexity for the AI. Increasing difficulty simply boosts enemy stats and does little to change behavior. You're not dealing with better tacticians, you're just taking on enemies who've been given buffs. This is a common problem in strategy and tactical gaming and essentially amounts to lazy programming. Give me more cunning opponents, not bigger punching bags. This brings me to my next point, the static world. Now, granted, the story is dynamic and there are any number of ways to approach each encounter, but the fact that there are no random encounters gives the world a fixed, lifeless feel to it. There's no patrolling goblin troops, no wandering peasants, no roving wild animals. There's only pre constructed encounters waiting for you with a director over your shoulder ready to say, action. The world doesn't feel as lived in as it does frozen in a weird sort of stasis. And then there are also the areas you've cleared that have an empty, almost airy feel to them. Where's the energy? Where's the vibrancy? Where's the life? This is a good place to talk about the story. I know this is going to be one of the more controversial points I bring up, and my opinion may change as I delve deeper into the game. However, so far the story rings kind of flat. Characters aren't all that likable, and I find I don't really care for their backstories. I'm honestly kind of bored with the main story. We've got tadpoles in our heads, and everyone we seek out for help says the same thing. Sounds like a personal problem. What's compelling me to play is the character building and leveling up, not the story. Not really, anyway. Another aspect of the game that can potentially break immersion for some players is the co op dialogue options. One of the core ideas behind Dungeons and Dragons is building a party to overcome challenges and puzzles together. But in Baldur's Gate 3, only the person who initiated the dialogue has any agency. The other players can make suggestions, but are unable to use any of their unique skills or attributes to help. This, to some degree, pushes co-op players to stop and decide which party member might be best before initiating each encounter, rather than work together as a team to overcome dilemmas. The final thing I want to mention in regards to immersion breaking is logical consistency. Being able to dip weapons into candlefire seems a bit hokey to me, but I guess that's just D&D for you. However, short and long bows having the same range or being able to throw weapons, regardless of their size, as far as I can shoot an arrow, breaks my suspension of disbelief. Also, the cover system seems a bit inconsistent to me. There are times when your path is blocked by a ledge or railing and you can't get off a spell or ranged attack, but are still open to enemy fire. The cover just seems a bit disjointed at times. And then, there is the environment itself. It's great that you can use items and objects in the environment in different ways to your advantage, but again, it's fairly limited and somewhat static. You can only interact with things that have been specifically placed. The environment is mostly fixed, not malleable. In a way, the developers are saying, you can play however you want, so long as you play by my rules. Anyway, that's it for immersion breakers. Let's talk about quality of life aspects. First off, the camera. It's not completely atrocious, but it's not good either. Both zooming in or out is limited. Tactical view does little, and the inability to change the camera angle has you perpetually stuck at a near 45-degree angle. What this amounts to is not being able to properly survey the battlefield or even simply appreciate the nuances of the detailed environments. Navigating the camera has been at times an infuriating experience for myself. Here's hoping a mod shows up to remedy this. Along the same quality of life vein is inventory management, which kinda sucks. As someone noted in the comments of one of my previous videos, IRL time is precious. So, I don't want to spend all of my time in-game fussing with a cluttered inventory. Why can't I just highlight multiple things and move them that way? I would also be remiss if I didn't mention the clunky feel of the battle interface and interaction with objects. I think this is more a case of just needing more time using the game's systems, though I still find myself making an errant click costing a valuable action, or worse, choosing the wrong target by accident. The very last thing I want to address is the F5 problem. Baldur's Gate 3 is constructed in a way that encourages players to save frequently, and if the mood strikes them, reload. AKA scum saving. This can create a somewhat disjointed experience. Obviously, it's at every player's discretion whether or not to abuse save scumming. My point is that Baldur's Gate 3 promotes this type of behavior, which in itself I don't think is a good thing. I hope a future update for the game adds some form of Iron Man mode that limits scum saving or eliminates it altogether. There you have it, folks, my honest impressions of Baldur's Gate 3. I do believe that the positives far outweigh the negatives, and that we have something very special here. I want to note that of the negative reviews on Steam, the common thread is a 20-hour or less playtime. Honestly, I was there myself. First 10 or 20 hours, I did not really enjoy. But if you're willing to look past the game's faults and give it a fair chance, I think you will be rewarded with a once-in-a-generation experience. Let me know what you guys think. Am I being too harsh, not harsh enough? What are some of the things that you love and don't love about the game yourself? Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Otto out.